George Washington was a super-duper important guy a long, long time ago. He was like a superhero, but without a cool cape. He lived in a time when America wasn't even a country yet. Can you believe it? George was born in a place called Westmoreland County in Virginia. It was a small town, and he grew up on a farm. He didn't have video games or smartphones like we do today, but he had lots of fun on his farm with animals and chores. He was a regular kid, just like you. Now, the big deal about George Washington is that he became the very first president of the United States. He was like the boss of the whole country. This happened a long time ago, in the 1700s. Before he became president, he did some pretty cool stuff that we should talk about. When George was a teenager, he worked as a surveyor. No, not a weatherman. A surveyor is someone who measures land and makes maps. It's like a real-life treasure hunt. George was really good at it. He even had a super cool job working in the wilderness. Later, he became a soldier. Not just any soldier, but a soldier in the American Revolutionary War. This was a big, epic fight where the American colonies wanted to be free from a place called England. George was a general, which is like the captain of all the soldiers. He led them into battles and was a big hero. Now, here's the part that's super famous. George Washington crossed a freezing river called the Delaware River. He did this on Christmas night, and it was so cold. He did it to surprise the other guys he was fighting, and it worked. This was a big deal in the war, and they even made paintings about it. But George Washington wasn't just about battles. He was also a really smart and nice guy. After the war, there was a big meeting called the Constitutional Convention. They made the rules for how our government works, and George was a big part of it. They picked him to be the president, kind of like a team captain. When he was president, he had to make some really important decisions. He helped set up the government we have today. He even decided that the president should only serve 2 terms, which means you can't be president forever. That's why our presidents change every few years. George Washington was like a role model for everyone. He was honest, strong, and a good leader. People loved him so much that they even wanted to make him a king, but he said no. He believed in a country where the people were in charge, not a king. One of the coolest things about George Washington is that he didn't want to be in charge forever. After he was president for 2 terms, he said, "I'm done." He went back to his farm and enjoyed his life. He showed everyone that leaders should step down and let others have a turn. But there's something else we should talk about. George Washington wasn't perfect. Like all people, he made mistakes too. One big mistake was that he owned enslaved people. Slavery was a terrible thing, and we know it was wrong. Even though George Washington did great things, we should remember that nobody is perfect. So, that's the story of George Washington. He was a brave soldier, a smart leader, and a really good guy. He's like a big hero in our country's history. We remember him every year on President's Day because he was the first president. And that's why he's a big deal. George Washington was the first president of the United States of America. He was a great leader and helped to win the American Revolutionary War. He was also a very good person and is known as the father of his country. Here is a simple biography of George Washington for 8-year-old kids. George Washington was born in Virginia in 1732. He grew up on a farm and learned to be a good horseman and surveyor. When he was 21 years old, he became a soldier in the French and Indian War. He fought bravely in the war and learned a lot about leadership. In 1775, the American Revolution began. The American colonists were fighting for independence from Great Britain. George Washington was chosen to be the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. He led the American army to victory against the British Army. After the war, George Washington helped to write the United States Constitution. He was also elected as the first president of the United States. He served 2 terms as president and helped to set the foundation for the new country. George Washington was a very honest and trustworthy person. He was also very brave and courageous. He was a great leader and helped to make the United States of America a free country. Famous episodes of George Washington Cherry Tree episode. When George Washington was a young boy, he chopped down a cherry tree on his father's farm. When his father asked him who did it, George Washington told him the truth. His father was very proud of him for being honest. Crossing the Delaware River. During the American Revolutionary War, George Washington led his army across the Delaware River in the middle of the winter. This was a very dangerous crossing, but Washington's army made it safely to the other side. They then attacked the British army and won the Battle of Trenton. Valley Forge. During the winter of 1777 to 1778, George Washington's army camped at Valley Forge. The winter was very cold and snowy, and the soldiers did not have enough food or clothing. Many soldiers died from disease and malnutrition. But Washington's army held on, and they eventually won the war. George Washington was a great leader and a great man. He is remembered as the father of his country. Here are some fun facts about George Washington. George Washington was over 6 feet tall. He had blue eyes and brown hair. He was a very good horseman. He loved to dance. He was a very hard worker. He was very honest and trustworthy. He was a great leader and helped to win the American Revolutionary War. George Washington was a real-life hero. He is an inspiration to people of all ages.